The attorney's hand was already reaching for the second envelope when my brother-in-law laughed. That laugh. Low and satisfied, the kind a man releases when he believes the counting is finally done. He had his arm around my husband's sister, Claudette, and she was smiling the way people smile when they've already spent the money in their heads, slow, private, a little cruel. The conference room at Whitmore and Associates smelled of old leather and floor wax and the ghost of rain that had blown in through the lobby door all morning. Outside, the November sky was the color of pewter. Inside, I sat with my hands folded on the table, breathing. Just breathing. Because there was a second envelope. And it had my name on it. Not the name they called me, Delia, or Marcus's wife, or, when they thought I couldn't hear, that quiet woman he brought home. My full name. Evelyn Delia Marchfontaine. Written in ink the color of midnight, in the hand of a woman who had been dead for 11 days and who had known me better than any of them ever cared to. I had not said a word in 20 minutes. I had let the attorney, a measured man named Gerald O'Say, read every line of what they believed was the whole of Grandma Rosetta's last will. I had watched my husband Marcus accept a number that made his chest lift. Watched Claudette accept another. Watched the cousins divide the furniture and the silver and the beach house in Hilton Head like men splitting a card pot, loud and easy and certain. And through all of it, I had known about that envelope. Rosetta had told me herself, 6 weeks before she died, on an afternoon when the two of us sat alone in her kitchen while sweet potato pie cooled on the rack and the ceiling fan turned slow overhead. Baby, she had said, pressing my hand between both of hers, there are 2 kinds of people in this family. The ones who talk about what they deserve, and the one who shows up. You have been showing up for 31 years. I have not forgotten. I had not understood what she meant then. Not fully. I thought it was the kind of thing an old woman says because her heart is full and the end is close and the words come easier. I held her hands and I said, "You don't owe me anything, Grandma." And she had looked at me with those dark amber eyes of hers, steady as river stones, and she had said, "Child. That's exactly why. Let me take you back to where this really began, because a thing like this does not start in an attorney's office. It starts much earlier, in small rooms, with small words that cut deep and leave no visible mark. I came into the Fontaine family the summer I was 24 years old, a woman with a graduate degree in agricultural land management, a savings account I had built dollar by dollar since the age of 15, and a love for Marcus that I thought was the kind of love that made you invincible. Marcus Fontaine was brilliant and warm, and when he looked at me, I felt understood in a way I had not known I was hungry for. His grandmother, Rosetta Fontaine, met me at a Sunday dinner that first August, looked me up and down with those amber eyes, and said, "She's got working hands." It was the best compliment I would receive from anyone in that family for the next 31 years. Because working hands, to Rosetta, was the whole of a person's character. His mother, Vivian, was another matter entirely. Vivian Fontaine was a woman constructed entirely of opinion. She had opinions about how I cooked, how I dressed, how I spoke in company, how I spent what little I made in my first years working for a county land trust office, and most of all, she had opinions about what her son deserved, which, in her estimation, was considerably more than me. She never said this directly. She said it sideways, the way certain people do, in little asides that floated past like smoke and were just as hard to grab hold of. "Oh, Delia, how practical of you. Marcus always did like simple things. I just hope you're keeping up with him, sweetie." I kept up. I kept up by waking before dawn to study for my certification exams. By commuting 40 miles each way when our one car needed to go to Marcus first. By cooking Sunday dinners for 12 people when Vivian's arthritis flared, which it did strategically, whenever she wanted something done. I kept up by learning the names of every acre of Rosetta's property, all 417 of it, spread across 2 counties in South Carolina, because Rosetta had started asking me questions about the land, about soil composition and easement law and water rights, and I answered every question she had. That was how it started between Rosetta and me. Not sentiment. Not even affection, at first. She was a rigorous woman. She had worked that land since before I was born, had held it through a tax lien in 1987 that almost ate it, through a developer's offer in 2001 that everyone else in the family wanted her to take, through 3 probate disputes that she won without flinching. When she discovered that the woman Marcus had married understood land the way she did, not as an asset, but as a living responsibility, something shifted between us. She started calling me on Tuesday mornings. Just to talk. About drainage patterns and the pecan grove that needed replanting and whether the tenant farmer on the Eastern 40 was treating the soil right. Marcus thought it was sweet. Claudette thought it was peculiar. Vivian never asked. None of them knew that about 4 years into those Tuesday calls, Rosetta had started asking me something else. Something that went beyond the land itself. She had started asking me to help her understand what the land was worth, legally and structurally, and what needed to happen for it to pass cleanly to the next generation without being torn apart by inheritance disputes or estate taxes or developers circling like vultures the moment she closed her eyes. I spent 2 years on that question. I brought in a land trust attorney, a woman named Dr. Camille Osei, no relation to Gerald, who specialized in black land preservation in the South, because black families in this country have lost more land than most people will ever know about, and Rosetta knew every story. The statistics are staggering. Black Americans owned as much as 15 million acres at the peak of the early 20th century. By the time I sat across from Rosetta at her kitchen table in 2018, that number had shrunk to less than 3 million. Heirs property disputes, tax sales, partition actions, the machinery of dispossession runs quiet but it runs constantly. Rosetta had been fighting it her whole life. And now she wanted to make sure the fight was finished before she left. We restructured the estate together, Rosetta and I, over 18 months. I brought every document I could find. She signed what needed to be signed. And there was one instrument, one specific legal arrangement, that we built very carefully and very quietly, because Rosetta had looked around at the people who bore her name and she had made a decision about who could be trusted with the thing she loved most. I did not tell Marcus. She asked me not to. I honored that. Now here is the part one I'm not proud of. Not the keeping of the secret, I made peace with that a long time ago. The part that still sits heavy is that by the time Rosetta died, I had spent 6 months watching my marriage come apart at the seams, and I had not told anyone about that either. Marcus had changed, or maybe I had finally stopped making excuses for the parts of him that were always there. He had lost his position at the development firm in 2021, not laid off, let go, for reasons he never fully explained, and the version of Marcus that came home after that was smaller and louder at the same time, the way a man gets when his pride has caved in and he cannot find another structure to hold him up. He started talking about Rosetta's land the way his mother always had. As a number. As a solution to something. When Grandma goes, he said one evening, and I remember the way the kitchen light threw shadows across his face, we need to be smart about it. I asked what smart meant. He looked past me and said the family was thinking about a corporate buyout. A resort developer had been making inquiries for years. 300 acres in Hilton Head territory, a historic pecan grove, water access. Claudette had already been having conversations. Vivian had already given her blessing. My stomach turned. I set down the dish I was holding. Rosetta would never have wanted that, I said. Marcus picked up his phone. Rosetta's not going to be around to want things. I stood at that counter for a long time after he left the room. I thought about all those Tuesday morning calls. I thought about what Rosetta had told me about her grandmother, who had worked that land during Jim Crow, who had buried 3 children in that soil and stayed anyway because leaving would have meant handing the land to people who had never loved it. I thought about Dr. Camille Osei's voice on the phone, steady and certain, when we had finalized the documentation. And then I thought about an envelope with my name on it in midnight blue ink, sitting in a fire-safe box in a file room at Whitmore and Associates. I kept washing dishes. I kept breathing. I waited. There are skills you develop when you have spent 3 decades being underestimated by people who love their own comfort more than they love the truth. You learn to carry things without showing the weight. You learn that the person who waits in a room while everyone else performs, while everyone else claims and calculates and talks over each other, that person is often the only one who can see the room clearly. Rosetta died on a Wednesday morning in early November, surrounded by magnolia light and the smell of the pecan grove coming through the window her great-niece had cracked open at her request. I was there. I held her hand. She looked at me once, near the end, and she pressed my hand once, slowly, and I understood everything she meant. The service was beautiful. The land was still. And then, 11 days later, we were in a conference room in downtown Columbia, South Carolina, and Gerald Osei was reading a will that distributed Rosetta's cash accounts, her jewelry, her Hilton Head property, and a parcel of the eastern farmland among her children and their spouses, a will that, when it finished, left the room full of satisfied breathing and Marcus's hand on the table near mine, not touching it, because he had stopped touching it months ago. Claudette's husband Victor laughed that low, satisfied laugh. I think that covers it, he said, reaching for his pen. Gerald Osei set the main document down. He was a quiet man in his 60s, precise in the way of someone who has spent decades around grief and money and knows that silence is the only appropriate container for both. He reached into the folder in front of him and produced a second envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. And on the front, in Rosetta's unmistakable hand, in that midnight blue ink, Evelyn Delia Marchfontaine. The room changed. Claudette's smile went perfectly still, the way a photograph goes still. Vivian, who was seated to my left, turned to look at me as if she had only just noticed I was in the room. Marcus stared at the envelope with an expression I had never seen on him before, something between surprise and a terrible dawning recognition. Victor said, "What is that?" Gerald Osei said nothing. He slid the envelope across the table to me. My hands were steady. I have thought about that moment many times since, wondered if my hands should have trembled, wondered if I should have felt triumph or vindication or any of the large, hot emotions that the room seemed to expect from me. But my hands were steady because Rosetta had been steady, always, and I had learned from her without knowing I was learning. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, handwritten, 3 pages long. And behind the letter was a legal instrument, a document I recognized, because I had helped to build it. I read the letter first. To myself. It was not a long letter, by the measure of what it carried. She had written, "Evelyn, you are the one who understood what this land is. Not the money it could make, not the problem it could solve, but what it actually is, a record of our survival. You never asked me for anything. That is why I am giving you everything that matters." The attached conservation easement and co-ownership deed, filed with the Richland County Recorder's Office on March 14 of this year, places 417 acres of the Fontaine family land in a permanent conservation trust. You are named as the trust director. No parcel may be sold, developed, or partitioned without your authorization for a period of 99 years. The land cannot be taken. I am giving you the deed because you are the only one who will not sell it. I set the letter down on the table, face up. I slid it toward the center so that everyone could read it, because I am not a person who withholds things for drama. But I also slid the legal instrument toward Gerald Osei and asked him, quietly, to confirm the recorded filing. He was already opening his laptop. He had known what was in the envelope. His expression was careful and professional, but his eyes held something I recognized, the look of a man who has been privileged to participate in something that will outlast the meeting room. The deed and easement were recorded with the county on March 14 of this year, he said. The filing is valid. Mrs. Marchfontaine is the named trust director with full authority over land use, development decisions, and conservation terms. The room was very quiet for a moment that lasted much longer than a moment. Victor said, "That can't be right." Claudette said, "Marcus." Just his name. Nothing after it. Vivian said nothing. She looked at the letter on the table, and then she looked at me, and for the first time in 31 years I saw something in her face that I had never seen directed at me. She saw me. Not Marcus's wife. Not that quiet woman. Me. Marcus sat back in his chair. He was looking at his hands on the table, and his jaw was working in that way it does when he is trying to find a version of the moment that he can live inside. I waited for anger. For accusations, for someone to say I had manipulated an old woman, for the noise and the heat that I had been bracing against for weeks, because I knew this day was coming and I knew that in this family, a woman holding power was going to require an explanation. Victor said something loud and reached for Gerald Osei's folder, and Gerald Osei removed the folder from his reach with the calm efficiency of a man who has done this before. Victor said Rosetta was not in her right mind. Gerald said that Rosetta had had her cognitive assessment documented by 2 independent physicians at the time of the filing. Victor said there had to be undue influence. Gerald said he was welcome to pursue that claim in probate court, where the filing documentation, the physician records, and a notarized statement from Rosetta herself would be entered into evidence. Victor sat down. I gathered the letter carefully. I folded it and placed it back in the envelope, because it was mine, and it was private, and the part of it that mattered legally was already recorded in a county courthouse. Claudette said, very quietly, "Did you know about this when Grandma was sick?" I looked at her. She had Rosetta's bone structure, the same strong jaw, but none of Rosetta's stillness. Her hands were twisting her rings. "Yes," I said. "And you didn't tell Marcus?" "Rosetta asked me not to. So I didn't." The room settled into something that was not peace but was the absence of any useful argument. There was nothing left to contest. The land was protected. The filing was valid. The attorney had confirmed it. And the woman they had written off for 31 years was sitting at the head of a table she had not asked to be placed at. Here is what I have thought about in the months since that day, because there has been time now, and the land has had a full winter to rest and a spring to open up again, and I have walked every one of those 417 acres with a surveyor and a soil scientist and a young woman from the county extension office who wants to bring back the pecan grove with heirloom rootstock. I have thought about Rosetta's grandmother, who held that land during years when a black woman holding land was an act of open defiance. I have thought about the 15 million acres and the 3 million acres and the gap between those numbers, which represents not just wealth but memory, not just property but the right to be from somewhere. I have thought about how Rosetta understood all of this in the marrow of her bones, the way people understand things they have inherited through suffering, and how she spent 87 years making sure that land could not be taken. And she handed it to me. Not because I am the most impressive person she knew. Not because I asked. Because I showed up on Tuesday mornings, and I learned the names of the drainage ditches, and when she asked me to help her build something that would outlast all of us, I brought her the best knowledge I had and I did not ask what was in it for me. There is something underneath all the legal machinery and the property law and the drama of that conference room, something I keep returning to. It is about what we pass on. Not just money, not just land, but the decision of who we trust with the things we love. Rosetta made her decision based on 31 years of watching. She was not sentimental about it. She was precise. And precision, I have come to understand, is its own form of love. Marcus and I filed for separation 3 months after the reading. It was not the land that ended us, the land was, if anything, the clearest thing between us by then. The ending had been coming a long time, and when you have spent 31 years standing in a family that treated you as a footnote, the ending of a marriage can feel less like a collapse and more like a door quietly opening. I do not say that without grief. I grieve what I thought we were building. But I do not grieve what I actually was in that house, and I refuse to spend another year pretending that footnote was a life. The land is what I have now. The land and the work. Last month I walked the east boundary line with the young extension officer. Her name is Tamara, she is 26 years old, and she has working hands, and I told her about Rosetta. About the tax lien in 1987 and the developer in 2001 and the Tuesday morning calls. Tamara listened the way young people listen when they know they are receiving something. She asked me about the conservation easement, about how the trust was structured, about what happens to the directorship after me. I told her the truth. We're building that part now. She wrote something in her field notebook, and the November light came across the pecan grove at an angle that made everything gold for a few minutes, the bare branches holding the light the way Rosetta used to hold my hands, completely, without reservation, with full knowledge of what was there. I stood in that light and I breathed. When I left the attorney's office on the day of the reading, Gerald Osei walked me to the lobby. He said very little. At the door, he paused, and said, "She recorded it in March." She was very deliberate about the timing. March was 8 months before she died. She had not been failing in March. She had been gardening and calling me on Tuesday mornings and making sure every document was signed and witnessed and filed by someone who could not be contested. I thanked him. He opened the door. The November rain had stopped and the sidewalk was silver with it, reflecting the pale sky. I stood on that sidewalk for a moment with the cream envelope in my hands and the weight of 417 acres somewhere behind my sternum, and I thought of what Rosetta had said the last time we were in her kitchen together. The pie cooling on the rack. The fan overhead. Her hands around mine. Child. That's exactly why. 31 years of Tuesday mornings. 31 years of showing up to a table where nobody pulled out a chair. 31 years of knowing more than I let on and working harder than anyone noticed and holding my breath in rooms where other people used all the air. And in the end, the land chose me. The land, or rather, the woman who loved it most, chose me. Because I was the one who knew what it cost to keep a thing. Because I never once tried to spend what wasn't mine. 417 acres of South Carolina earth will not be sold. The pecan grove will grow back from heirloom rootstock. The tenant farmer on the Eastern 40 has signed a new stewardship agreement with terms that Rosetta would have approved of, and Tamara from the Extension Office is building a soil health program that will run for the next 10 years. Children who have not been born.